From OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'm going to be looking at another game from the 2011 Women's Grand Prix in Rostov. And this is a round 9 match between Kateryna Lahno, Ukrainian GM, against the Women's World Champion Yifan Hou, Chinese phenom, superstar, 17-year-old GM, just been tearing it up lately. So, Lahno starts with c4 and now going into d4. And so with bishop b4, seems like Yifan Hou's really prepared this very thoroughly this year. She's been playing it a lot, been scoring a lot of really nice wins with it as black, and trying to maybe go into the Rogozin variation or a similar line. So with e3, this is a little bit more of a kind of a cautious variation for white, a little bit more solid than some other lines involving maybe knight f3 and bishop g5 after knight f6. And so now it's kind of transposing into some lines in the Nimzo Indian after a3. And so there's some lines here with the immediate c5, knight c6, maybe take on c4, and then e5. Black achieves considerable pressure against the white center. But I've seen that Hou really plays a more, she kind of likes to play a more active style. And so the positional style like that, maybe it's not really her thing. So she plays extremely actively, especially with the black pieces. So now b6 and c5, just normal developing moves, trying to put a little pressure on the white center, maybe gain a little space. And now bishop a6. Seems kind of like a weird move, but it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, white's bishop on d3 is definitely her best piece, and black sometimes has some trouble developing that light square bishop, so why not, go for an exchange? And if white takes, knight takes a6, the knight can reroute via c7 and maybe e6 very, very easily. So now black, white says, okay, you can initiate the trade. So developing white's queen to d3. And it's kind of becoming clear what's going to happen in this type of line. The normal plan is usually that white is going to have an advantage in the endgame because of her pawn structure, big central pawn mass. If she can play e4 and get that pawn center rolling, she's definitely going to have a good advantage. Also, e4 would open up the dark squared bishop on c1. So what that means is black is going to have to play pretty dynamically and definitely actively to try to distract white from that plan and stop white from playing e4. So knight g3 definitely makes sense. I mean, e4 is now very possible. Knight c6, okay, e4 is not quite so possible because of the pressure on d4. So bishop b2, so reintroducing the threat of e4, developing the last piece. So now Hou plays c4, and I'm always sketched out playing this type of move and this line in general because I feel like white is eventually going to be able to force through with e4, and the pawn being on c4, now black has released the tension in the center, so white doesn't have to worry about defending the d4 pawn. And aside from that, if white gets an e4, she's going to have a very strong attack on the kingside and a good space advantage. And it just takes forever for black to roll these queenside pawns. I mean, it takes like 35 moves, and even then. So, it's a roughly balanced position, but I definitely prefer white here, even though the bishop on b2 looks horrible. In the future, it can open up very easily. So I prefer white because it's so tough for black to continue to prevent e4, especially after playing c4 because it releases the tension and the pressure on the center, on the white center. So Hou tries h5. This is a pretty common plan in this type of line, trying to kick the knight from g3 and mainly from its support of pushing e4. So now rook e6 definitely makes sense. Want to double on the e file. The rook is very mobile on the 6th rank. Can transfer to attack the king. Queen c2, nice move. Seems like a very small thing, but it's supporting e4, and maybe the queen can even come to f5. Supports the knight on f5, etc. So h4. Think maybe this was a little bit too fast. I think it was a little too hasty by Hou here. Trying to complicate things, but coming out of the complication, she achieved a clearly worse, almost a lost position. So maybe an improvement here could be, I was trying to think, I'm like, what can white do better in this position, or black do better? It's tough. It's not easy because white's going to play e4 and have a very good position. Maybe just queen to e7 is the right, is the medicine here. I don't know. I mean, queen e7, just trying, at all costs to prevent e4. Queen e8 is also possible, but this is not the type of move you really want to make because it's like a superficial prevention of e4. I mean, you really want this rook to be on e8, not the queen. The idea of queen e8 being to play, if e4, h4, and now knight f5 doesn't hit the queen on e7. Anyways, in the game, Hou tried h4, going for some activity, trying to dice it up a little bit of complications. And after knight f5, h3, I mean, white could even play g4 here and try to play for a kingside attack and play e4. So h3, I'm not too impressed. So g6 was Hou's idea, and now to play knight g4, trying to solve her problems through some tactics. The pressure on e3, so kind of forces f takes g4. And now the pawn on g4 is pretty weak. So if white tries to defend g4 with h3, now rook e8, and yes, black is down a pawn, but she's got good compensation due to the pressure on the e3 pawn, and it's going to be very tough, close to impossible for white to play e4 in the future. I'd say this is pretty equal. Instead, e4 directly was played by Mrs. Lahno, and so now e4, okay, take the pawn on g4, who cares? And it's going to be a tough position. So rook e8 first, forcing e5, and now queen takes g4. And here, I'm looking at it, and I don't know what Hou missed here, because I guess she assumed Lahno was going to play h3 to hold on to the pawn, because this position is almost lost for black, because her queen is so misplaced. And yeah, the bishop on b2 looks horrible, but it can get reactivated via a3, bishop to a3, or just bishop c1 coming in to take advantage of the weak dark squares around the black king. So this is almost lost. And after rook e3, there's nowhere for the black queen to go. And white has a crushing attack, and material is equal. Also, the black pawn majority, this is not doing anything. It's going to take like 4 or 5 moves to do anything with that, and even then, it's not going to be a decisive threat. It's more of a long-term, in-game kind of pass pawn threat. So f5 was tried. I don't really see any other choice. Well, I do, but they're not very good. So kind of a rock and a hard place for black here. Not much to do because the queen is just in such an awkward position. And if black tries something like rook e7, this is not going to be fun. Even just rook f6 immediately, and this is going to be an extremely difficult defense. Maybe not even rook f6. You can play a4, move the bishop to a3. Bishop can come to c1, g5, f6. That's simple route to victory. Very tough to stop. Other than that, knight e7 seems like it just fails right off the bat to rook g3. I guess something like queen h5 and queen f2. So knight f5 isn't possible because of the pin on the black king. You can just take the knight. And rook f8 seems like even just rook h3. And white is going to be able to get in on the h file. Seems like pretty easily it's going to get in on the h file. Rook h4. This is just not very fun to play. Queen f5. This is not a fun position for black to play because her queen is so misplaced. Even a4 here with bishop a3, putting some pressure on that rook. White can triple up. White can do whatever she wants. That's the point. So I don't know what Hou missed in this kind of stuff. Knight e7 doesn't work. Black is busted. So she tried f5 with the idea of barely holding it together with queen to e4. White's not going to trade queens here. The black queen is so misplaced, and white, can just penetrate all day on the dark squares. So queen h4 to stop, queen to h6. Just going into a lost position after rook takes f5. And this was the idea, to get the 2 rooks against the queen, but white's going to get a lot of pawns. And black's king is going to be extremely exposed. There's no way black's going to be able to talk her way out of this. So, okay, so what just happened? Now queen f3. What happened? Where am I? How did I get here? So queen f3, the pawn on d5 is extremely loose. And then he tried to hold on to it, rook d8, for example, just bishop c1. And the black king is so weak, there's no way she's going to get out. So instead, Hou tried rook g8, bishop c1, a very nice move. You don't want to rush things. When you get into a one position, you want to slow down, consolidate, and then push forward for the decisive win. You don't want to go too crazy and allow your opponent some loose, wild counterplay. Like, queen takes d5 would allow black to achieve some pretty good counterplay on the g file and a decent attack against white's king. So instead, bishop c1, a nice move. The pawn on d5 is not going anywhere. Just take your time. The rook's not going to go back to d8. Now bishop g5 is threatened. So after knight d8, bishop f4, again, the pawn on d5 is not going anywhere. Why allow your opponent counterplay when you have an easily won position? So now taking the pawn, because king e6 maybe could hold it together for black. So taking the pawn now, knight e6, and white has just got too many pawns, and black's king is just too exposed. So even though black has achieved some coordination with her pieces, a5, this is an example of why these kind of pawns take a long time to get going. They take way too many moves. So now d5, and here, just a nice conversion by Lahno, picking up a couple of pawns. So now queen e7, and now just d7. And this just wins the game, because after check, king h1, smooth move, and here he resigned because she's, white's going to queen with check, and black has only got so many checks. I mean, the checks run out. Pretty simple. Black's got nothing here. White's just going to queen with check. So after king h1, Hou just resigned here because she the game's over. So Lahno played a great tournament, definitely worthy of mention. She had second place with 7.5 out of 11. And this round 9 win over the eventual tournament leader and winner, Yifan Hou, she was making it close, but Hou just, after a 4-0 start, she was unstoppable, just coasted to the finish. So definitely a fantastic game by white, very solid, very logical opening play, and black was just unable to achieve sufficient activity to compensate for white's space advantage. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.